This is engineered oak flooring, and we're going to show you the easiest way to install it.
We're going to teach you all the tricky bits like undercutting doors, cutting round obstacles such as fireplaces and radiator pipes, setting out for your flooring, and every little detail that makes engineered oak flooring tricky. With this video, it won't be tricky anymore.
So don't go anywhere, because by the end of this video, you'll be able to lay this stuff yourself. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you've got a nice sound, level floor. Any lumps and bumps, get them off now because you don't want them in the way, and then give it a sweep or a vacuum and make sure it's nice and dust free and clean before we get the underlay down. Now the oak floor we're laying today is a click system type rather than the glue down type, so we need to put an underlay down. Now the underlay just takes that noise away and gives it a nice cushion, and look how long these boards are that the customer's gone with. I've never laid oak flooring this long. What are these? 1800? They're huge. Right, so this will be interesting. So let's get this underlay down and then we can get on to setting out for these boards. Now, when you're selecting your underlay, look on the instructions for your individual flooring, and that'll tell you what underlay is recommended, or speak to your local supplier and they'll tell you as well. So we've cut one bit of underlay and laid it in there. We'll just put a little infill bit in the door there, and we've run that all the way to the end. What we'll do is, as we go along through the room, because we're working from a left-hand corner, choosing our place to start, but we'll go over that in a minute, and we're working our way that way, and we'll just overlap this onto the next bit of underlay over the top as we go through the room. If we put it all down now, it'll just get pulled up and moved around, so there's no point. We'll do that as we go. We'll get some planks down first, which will of course weigh this down, and then we can put the next lot down. Now this is quite a big room that we're doing today, and the first thing you want to do before you put any boards down is to work out the way that you're going to lay them and do some setting out. Don't lay any boards until you know the pattern. And the first thing I do when I walk into a room is look at where the challenges are going to be. Now, because of the length of these boards today, if we work from that left-hand corner across the room in this direction, when we get to the last board, if our last board is bigger than the opening on this door here, what will happen is we won't be able to get the last board in, because we won't be able to tip it in and get the click system to work. So if it's a shorter board, you would, because you'd be able to put the board in, say up to here, back it off and use a block to knock it in. It'd be a little bit more difficult than something like laminate or LVT, because it'd bind up on the timber, but it would potentially be get roundable. I don't want to get in that position, so I want to lay from this left hand corner in that direction, because there's no doorways at the end of the job basically. So it's about working out the way you want to lay the floor that will make it easier, and then we do the setting out, because we don't want little slivers along the wall. We don't want to get to the end and find a little sliver, because it won't look very nice. And we've got a fireplace half to go around as well. We don't want a little sliver of flooring in there because it won't look very nice. So let's start doing some setting out. I'll just move this out of the way for now so that I can show you how I'm going to do my setting out. Now there's lots of different ways that you can set out for your flooring. The easiest way to do it as a DIY is to grab a plank of your flooring. It can be an offcut like this or a full one. These are a bit big to handle, so I'll use an offcut because we're only really worried about the width as we go across the room. And I like to lay my flooring along the length of the room. So what I'm going to do is grab my flooring. Now we need to check the instructions here, because it'll tell you what the gap needs to be. On engineered oak, it's normally quite big. In this case, the instructions state 10 mil, but check your individual flooring. Now this is where it's a little more tricky, because we're starting our first plank in a doorway, so we need to work it out from there. However, if you're starting it just on a normal straight wall, you'd put your 10 mil packer, if yours is 10 mil, against the wall, put your first flooring plank against it, so you've got that gap there, and then you'd make a little mark where the plank finishes, not where the tongue finishes, where the plank finishes. If you do it from the tongue, you'll be wrong by the time you get that side of the room, because all those tongues will mount up. And then we will line up that receiving edge there with that mark, and we'll do the same again, and we would do that across the room all the way until we get to the other side, and then we'd know what gap we've got. Ours is a little bit different, so I'll show you from the doorway, because we need to make sure our first plank goes into this doorway. Now our first row is going to be starting here. So what's going to happen is we're going to be cutting, you can see there's already a little mark on there, we're going to rip down this bit along the wall here, so we'll have that much gap along this wall on the rest of the row, but we want this piece here to sit within this doorway here. So that means our first mark goes there, and then we start to work our way across the room from that point there. So now we've got to our fireplace half, there's our mark, so we know we've got a row of floor in there, and what we can do is just move this plank up so that it's on the edge of that mark, and we can see that we're going to have about 70 mil in front of the half there, so we're not going to have a little sliver. If we had a little sliver, say 10 mil, we'd take off more, we'd rip more down on our first row to give us a bigger gap by the time we reach this half. And it's the same on this side of the room, we've got about a 70 mil gap along the wall. Now, if we've only got a tiny little 10 mil gap and we're not happy with our final row, our first row needs to be cut down more to increase the gap on the final row. You can do it the other way, you can add a little bit more or decrease a little bit more. So we now know we're happy with the setting out in terms of the width of the room, but let's have a look at the length of it. Now at this stage we're not clicking in any flooring and we're not cutting around that wall there, around that door frame. We're just purely laying these boards out just to figure out what the lengths are going to be so we can work out the cuts. So I've laid the first one in with a gap of 10 mil against the wall over there, and then I'm just going to work my way with these giant planks all the way to the other end of the room without clicking them in. You don't need to click them in. Now because these planks are absolutely giant, it only takes about 3 to get to the end of the room. But all you're going to do is lay them in there, get your gap right at the end, so your expansion gap. Remember that's 10 mil for us. And you can see that we've got, what we got there, about 2/3 of the plank to fill that gap, and then the offcut, we know we're going to take down the other end, and that will be our starting point at the other end. Now if you get to this end and you've got a tiny little gap, which is more common if you've got smaller planks, if you've got a tiny little gap, you'd have to cut a little bit off the first plank to increase the gap on the last plank. Again, it's about thinking ahead and thinking about what sort of gap you're going to have by the time you get to this end, because if you have a tiny little cut of plank, it won't look very nice. Now when you start on your first plank, remember you want the bigger tongue, so that is the leading tongue, that one there, facing away, facing the way that you're working, and then the receiving tongue will come into it. I'm not going to click it in, but that is the direction that the planks go on a click system like this. Now this door frame has already been undercut, but I'll show you how to do that on the door that end of the room, because what we want to do is slide our flooring under the architrave. I prefer to do it that way, it gives you a much nicer and professional finish rather than trying to cut around the architrave. So they've been undercut with a multi-tool, but I'll show you how to do that in a minute.
These planks are too long to get into the doorway, so to create the pattern we need to go around the door frame, I choose to use a series of measurements, a square and a level to transfer the marks onto the floor plank ready to cut it.
Now I'm going to use a circular saw to rip down the width for that board. You can see the line there. We need to take that bit out, and then when I get to here I'm going to use my jigsaw just to create that shape that goes under the door frame. So now we've got this cut, get the packers back in so we maintain the expansion gap, and then we should be able to slide that board under the door frame. And you can see that by doing it that way, you don't end up, just rub that pencil off there, with horrible gaps around the door frame, and it makes a much more professional finish. And now we just need to rip down the rest of the planks, these first row along this wall, to that thickness that you see there, and that will be hidden under the skirt, and then we can carry on across the room. To get these clicked in, all we want to do is tip it and then lower it down, making sure that this edge here is in line, because if it's not, it'll create a gap for the next plank. So just lower that down, and there we go, that is clicked in nice and flush. So that is our first row, and we've got that gap there with our packers. Now we're going to move back down to this side, and using the offcut that we took from that end, we'll start to create our staggered random pattern. What we're going to do, use that bit that we cut off the other end, and again what we're going to do is we're just going to try to lay these for now. We're not going to click them in, just lay them in position, and we can visually check the pattern because what we don't want is any joints to run near each other. Now it's really up to you how you lay this out, but you can see what I've done here. We've got 4 different lengths of planks. So our first plank is full length, and then we've got a shorter one, and then we go up to about 2/3, and then we come down to a half plank. And that leaves us a nice random pattern, and it'll look really effective. And all we do is we carry out that pattern across the floor, and you'll never get a joint that's anywhere near another joint. Now as we work our way across the room, I'll show you different little tips, and what I'm going to show you now is how we cut our last plank if we're running into a wall. We need to cut a plank to fill that gap there. We don't need a tape measure to do it either. All we need to do is grab one of our planks. What we would do, of course, is if we cut that now, we'd end up cutting off the tongue that we want. So what we do is we spin that round so that we've got the wrong tongue. So the tongue we want is now up this end. We move that up to the wall and we create our 10mm, just like we did before. What we can see is where we need to cut that. So we'll cut that there in line with our previous plank. So we've cut that, and now it will fit the gap. Now I'm going to show you how we click the engineered oak planks in. It's a little bit fiddly because these ones are very long, but normally this is quite rare to have planks this long, so you should be able to handle them a little bit easier. First thing we're going to do, we're going to put our plank into the previous row of planks, and then you can see we've got a slight gap there. I'm going to slide that plank up so that it's butted up against the previous one. And then I'm just going to push it down, and you can see it clicks in. Now at the same time, we want to be pulling this plank towards the previous row. And as you do that, you're probably going to find it'll go in, but there might be a very small gap. So I like to have an offcut of flooring and a rubber mallet, and we'll just give it a little tap along the edge just to close that gap up. Now that gap is closed up. Now what you mustn't ever do is hit the leading tongue here with your rubber mallet, because you'll just break it and then the next row won't go in. But that is how you click them in. Every single week on my website, Ultimate Tool Competitions, we kit people out with power tool bundles, and this week's no different. We've got this massive 11-piece Makita power tool kit full of 18-volt tools. Do not miss out on this one. It's jam-packed full of trade quality tools, so whether you're a tradesman or a DIYer, this will kit you out with power tools for life. But if the tools are not for you, there's a £1,200 cash alternative. Already on UTC, we've had nearly 100 winners and given away nearly 20 grand's worth of power tools. So don't miss out on this lot. Get your name in the hat, click the link in the description, and I'll see you over there. Now this next row, what we're going to have to do, rather than laying it in this direction, we're going to have to backwards lay. So we're going to have to lay from that direction. So the reason for that, if we lay it this way, we won't be able to lower our final plank in under the door frame. I'm going to show you how to undercut this in a minute. So by backwards laying it, we can lay this plank in first, slide it under the door frame, and then work in that direction. So let's undercut the door frame. I'll show you how to do that now, and then we'll backwards lay from there.
Our aim is to undercut the architrave and the door frame up to where the door bar is going to go. To do that, I use an offcut of flooring and a pencil to make a mark, and I just cut that bit of timber out with a sharp blade in my multi-tool, and then just hoover up the mess.
Now we've cut the plank, and all we're going to do is use our rubber mallet. You can see Chris is up there, and we're going to tap it along in the groove, because it's of course already located into the previous plank. We'll tap it along and it'll go under the door frame and make a nice neat job of it. And now that one's in, all we do is lay the rest of the planks in this row backwards. It's a little fiddly, you just have to lift them all up, tip them, just like we did before. The only difference is you can't just hit that plank down to create the joint. You've got to lift it and then join the two. But it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. All we're going to do is we're going to finish this bit, and then we're going to work our way across the floor. Now, if the video is helping you, hit like, that'll help it to reach more people and help more people. And hit subscribe if you haven't already, because you don't want to miss out on future videos. Right, so we're getting there. We're getting across the room. And what I'm going to show you now is how we cut around an obstacle. So we've got this fireplace half. Now, because these planks are super long, we've got two cuts on this plank. We've got one that side of the half and one that side of the half. So it's a good little one to demonstrate how you cut around a corner or an obstacle. So you'll want a pencil for this. I'm using these Hultafors dry markers these days. Links to all the handy tools for the job are in the description below. So what we're going to do, we've got our next plank and we're going to lay that up against the previous plank. So just lay it in line. Now remembering we want an expansion gap around this half, we're just going to make a little mark just 10 mil short of where the half is, and then we're going to do the same for this side of the half, and then we're going to move the plank and lay it in the tongue, and then at the front of the half, so we know the depth, we'll just make that little mark with our 10 mil expansion gap in front of the half there as well. I'll do that at both ends and then join those two lines along the length of the plank together. So we know the width for that plank, and now I'll just use my square on that first mark we made and strike a line to that at each end. So you can see we have made that little shape there that we need to cut out. So now we've got our shape. It's a little hard to tilt this one in, but we should be able to do it. All we're going to do is just get as close as we can on the edge there. It's a little fiddly, to be fair. We'll get it as close as we can. There we go. It's now fell in, and we'll be able to just manipulate it and get it in. And that is how you cut around an obstacle. We've got to the other end of the room. We've done the bulk of this floor now. I'll show you the finished product once the skirtings are on, but it's looking really good. We've got to the other end and we've just got to cut around the pipes that come out of the floor for this radiator.
When I'm cutting around radiator pipes, I make two marks, one along the length of the plank and one across the width of the plank. I then take the measurement so that I know how far I need to come into that plank and transfer that to where my pipe needs to go. So we've got a centre mark for the pipe. I'm then just using a spade bit to cut out for that pipe. These were some old bits that Chris had, not mine. And then I used a jigsaw just to take that bit out. And finally, I use a radiator pipe collar just to cover up the hole.
We've gone all the way across the floor, put the skirtings back on for that professional look and finish, and now look how good it looks. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. If you have, there's much more to learn about flooring, so click on one of these videos and I'll see you guys in the next one.